Hey, Marianne.
Hey, Gordon.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. Well, today I'd like to talk about Mindful Eating, Mindful Life, this book, How to Change the Habits That Sabotage Your Health. This is wonderful. My wife and I both read it, and it was fabulous. I hadn't really thought about the mind, how involved the mind is with eating, and it was very much an aha to me. So what made you write this book?
Well, in 2006, as you probably know, obesity surpassed smoking
Yes.
as the number one cause for preventable illness and death. And I was at that time on a number of committees at the hospital where I worked, and they wanted to address this issue. And so I was on a committee to look at this problem. And what became clear to me is that the focus of that hospital was to put together a bariatric surgery department. And I just didn't think that was the right answer, or certainly not the only answer. And so I was outvoted on that idea. And they did do the bariatric surgery program.
Mm-hmm.
And then by about a year or so later, I started seeing in my clinic the concerns, people with the concerns that I had, and many more. So I was seeing micronutrient loss, I was seeing pernicious anemia, which is secondary to B12 insufficiency, which happens if you don't have enough of your stomach to absorb the precursors to B12.
As a result of the surgery.
And I was seeing things I was not, that's right, I was seeing things I totally didn't expect, like new addictions.
Mm.
And that got me thinking, what's this about, and what is it about overeating in the first place that's actually a form of addiction?
Mm-hmm.
And so I started doing literature review on the topic. There wasn't a whole lot, but there were a few research articles. And at the time I was doing a lot of mindfulness practice, going on retreats and so on, and I just thought, this has got to be a possibility. I put together a series of classes, rolled them out, and Gordon, I could not believe how successful these classes were. We don't talk in the class or in the book about weight loss.
Right.
We talk about optimizing health. How do you nourish yourself in a way that's cohesive, authentic, and more deeply on point? So you're not turning to food as a form of addiction, when in fact what you need is something else.
Right.
The research that I had done, the literature review, really identified emotional eating as the number one cause for people eating when, in fact, they didn't need the nutrients.
Mm.
And it stands to reason, right? Because
it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Because where do you feel the emotions in your body? You feel, they talk about it, the pit of your stomach. I feel that in the stomach. Oh, I couldn't stomach it. There's so many phrases that come out of our body's wisdom, of our experience. Mm-hmm. And so, and then you think about, as an infant, our first form of nourishment was food. And if we're picked up and cuddled, almost always there's food involved. And many people grew up in families where the way they showed love or received love was through food. I can go on and on. So,
well, I love you talking about the family centered around food and growing up around certain foods, and then what that feels like later and how you react to things later in life that were actually put there when you were very young.
Yes.
And the habits that we're taught.
Yes.
That to me is amazing, because I see a lot of people. I'm in health and wellness, so I see a lot of different issues out there with people's relationship with food.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
and it can go either way. Most of the people who have come to the classes have issues with overweight, and they want help with that. But I have had people with anorexia or bulimia. There are different kinds of relationships that people develop with food that are maladaptive. And so really, it completely stands to reason that if you're eating for any reason other than needing the nutrients, then there's probably something else that could be meeting that need. And so, beyond, a lot of people want to talk about food in relationship to being on a diet or losing weight. And right off the bat, I try to nix that in the bud. And the reason is that we are so beautifully designed that we can survive on very little. And so our subconscious hears deprivation, and people say, I think my metabolism changed because I eat less, and they are right. That really happens.
Oh, I believe it. And we as Americans are jaded when it comes to food anyway. We treat it a lot differently than a lot of people in other countries do.
Oh, you're absolutely right.
And you drive down the street and you can't go a mile without being bombarded with something that's unhealthy and not good for you.
Well, when people do sometimes press me, Dr. Iyer, please just tell me what I can and can't eat. They really do want a diet. I say, okay, let's start here. Let's look at all the stuff you're eating that isn't food to start with. If it's processed and it's a long list of chemicals, fat, and sugar, that's not food.
Right.
That is not food. Stop eating stuff that isn't food. Just start there and see what happens.
Well, I've always been very practical when it comes to food. Mm-hmm. So for me, it's been as a competitive athlete, it's been lean, protein, and vegetables is where it's at all the time for me. Now, do I eat that? Well, I try to follow an 80-20 rule, which is 80% of that nature, and then the 20% is something other than maybe what I should be doing, because we're not perfect.
And this is a good point you're making, Gordon, because there are individuals who, in spite of my best efforts, will really try to do some deprivation stuff because they know that what they're eating is not good for them. And so I give them the single rule of don't eat it if it's not food. But all of us have something, or most of us have something that we would call our comfort food, our go-to, and it's different for different people.
It is, yes.
And so one of the rules of thumb that I use is do not deprive yourself of that which you know authentically is giving you comfort in a way that goes beyond the food. But tell yourself the truth about it. Mm-hmm. And I will never forget, in one of the classes, we had this conversation, and a woman came to class the next day. She was so excited. She said, I didn't believe you, but when I slowed down and really loved myself eating that Nestle's chocolate chip cookie or whatever it was some chocolate chip cookie, I discovered one was more than enough. I didn't need to furtively hide and have 3 down the hatch before so that nobody could catch me.
That's exactly right.
And so if we identify what provides nourishment on a multiplicity of levels, either because it reminds us of our childhood or it meets some need, that's okay. We don't want to beat ourselves up about that, but really savor it. Let it meet that function. And a lot less can go farther.
I think it has a lot to do with our busy lives that we have, and we don't think about what we're doing. That's the mindfulness section of it that it was so interesting to me is we don't think about what we're eating. We don't take the time, as you said, to savor the food. I'm bad myself. I know to sit down to a meal and I look down and it's gone, and I don't remember what I had. I'm hoping it was pretty good for me, but don't always know that. So I think when we talk about mindfulness, meditation, those things that make you look within the things that you're doing and slow down and introspect, Yes. And I don't think we do that with food. I don't think we're taught to do that with food.
Well, and so I said emotional eating was the number one. The number 2 is mindlessness. And it's exactly what we're talking about. It's a slightly different topic, but very relevant, particularly in our society. I mean, truly, multitasking is considered a virtue. And for better or for worse, oftentimes that includes when we're eating. Most people don't sit down and just eat and notice what they're eating. And if we taste what we're eating, this is a physiological fact, that after a few mouthfuls of something, it is less satisfying to the taste buds. And so it becomes a simple cramming thing. Mm-hmm. And so if we are paying attention to the nuances of the flavors, even for a portion of the meal, and then stop and have a conversation, put the fork down, and then start again. I mean, in Europe, as you probably know, meals are social events, but they also go on for a long time. Nobody rushes through.
Oh goodness, I have an Austrian counterpart. His name's Marcus. And and it had wine and it had appetizers, and we talked, and it was an education for me. It went on. We were there for 2 hours for dinner. Every time we went to dinner, it was like that. But it was amazing, and it was a jumping off point for me of, oh, this is another thing. This is a whole other thing to do. So that was a great lesson for me.
One of the questions I think of as you're talking, where are we in such a hurry to get, and for why?
I'm not sure we know.
Because most people are looking for satisfaction of some sort. And somehow we think it's out there and we need to do something to get to it. I don't think it's conscious. But most of the time, everything we're doing is for some purpose that we think we're getting to. And it's like a miracle. If you really slow down enough to notice the joy and the amazingness, if that's a word, of this meal, the love of somebody who made it, all of a sudden your life is so full, you need so much less. I mean, it starts to feed on itself. You start to slow down to notice things, and it becomes easier to slow down. And by the same token, in counterpoint, if you're in a hurry, that creates a momentum. And it's difficult to break that momentum. But if we notice, if we can see it, we can start to make choices to slow it down. Just see how that will be.
Well, I think that what my mama told me was that life is all about choices. And then yesterday, another thing that was important came up, and a podcast that Sarah and I were doing was food is medicine. And if you treat it with that importance, I think it changes things for you. And I think it's a big deal. Well, listen, it's been awesome talking about this. I love this topic of conversation. I believe we could go on all day about it. But we'll pick back up at a later date.
There's lots to talk about.
There's so much to talk about. Thank you, Marianne.
You're welcome.